boshlab davlat rahbari tomonidan navbatdagi 5 yillik taraqqiyot strategiyasi ijrosiga kirishdik. Ruxsatinglar bilan bugungi tadbirimizni ochiq deb e'lon qilamiz va xalqaro konferensiya mavzusi yuzasidan
Recording in progress.
Ruxsatinglar bilan bugungi tadbirimizni ochiq deb e'lon qilamiz va xalqaro konferensiya mavzusi yuzasidan ayrim fikr mulohazalarni bildirib o'tsam. Meni ismim Alisher Karimov, O'zbekiston Respublikasi Adliya vazirining o'rinbosari hisoblanaman. Birinchi navbatda tadbirni tashkillashtirishda yaqindan yordam bergan Amerika Qo'shma Shtatlari Xalqaro taraqqiyot agentligiga o'z minnatdorchiligimizni bildiramiz. Tadbirimizda doimiy hamkorlarimiz Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkiloti taraqqiyot dasturi va Yevropa Ittifoqining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasi vakillarini ko'rib turganimizdan bag'oyatda xursandmiz. Buyuk Britaniya, Xorvatiya, Amerika Qo'shma Shtatlari, Rossiya kabi mamlakatlardan xorijiy hamda mahalliy ekspertlar tadbirimizda bugun ma'ruzalar bilan ishtirok etadi. Bizani qiziqtirgan savollar bo'yicha fikr almashishga imkoniyat yaratib beradi. Bugun sizlar bilan strategik islohotlarni huquqiy jihatdan ta'minlash, bu borada so'nggi 5 yil ichida bosib o'tilgan yo'l, eng asosiysi 22-26-yillarga mo'ljallangan O'zbekistonning taraqqiyot strategiyasi doirasida huquqshunoslar oldida turgan yangi chaqiriqlar haqida muhokama o'tkazamiz. O'tgan davr mobaynida davlat va jamiyat hayotining eng muhim yo'nalishlarida, eng muhim sohalarni tubdan isloh qilishga qaratilgan qator islohotlar amalga oshirildi. Shu yerda o'tirgan juda ko'p insonlar bevosita bu islohotlarda ishtirok etishdi. Birinchi navbatda qonunchilik sohasini tahlil qiladigan bo'lsak, 300 dan ortiq qonun va 4000 dan ortiq prezident hujjatlari qabul qilindi. Qonun ustuvorligini ta'minlash va sud huquq sohasidagi islohotlarni yanada takomillashtirish yo'nalishida asosiy yo'nalishlardan biri sifatida ko'rilgan holda keng ko'lamli islohotlar amalga oshirildi. Jumladan davlatimiz rahbari tashabbuslari bilan qabul qilingan ilk qonun korrupsiyaga qarshi kurash to'g'risidagi qonun bo'ldi. Unda normativ huquqiy hujjatlar va ular loyihalarining korrupsiyaga qarshi ekspertizasini o'tkazish qonun darajasida belgilanganligi bu biz yuristlar uchun juda ham ahamiyatli hisoblanadi. Harakatlar strategiyasi doirasida birinchilardan bo'lib O'zbekiston Respublikasi sud tizimini tubdan takomillashtirish faoliyati va uni samaradorligini oshirishga qaratilgan ilk farmon qabul qilindi. Birinchi qabul qilingan prezident qarori bo'lsa, qonun hujjatlarini tarqatish tizimini tubdan takomillashtirish chora-tadbirlari to'g'risida. E'tibor qaratsangiz, birinchi qabul qilingan normativ hujjatlar, ya'ni O'zbekiston oldingi 5 yillik rivojlanish dasturida huquqiy munosabatlarni tartibga solishga qaratilgan juda ham ustuvor yo'nalishlar bo'yicha qabul qilingan. Ushbu sohada amalga oshirilgan ishlar, natijalar to'g'risida batafsil ma'lumotlar Adliya vazirligi tomonidan chop etilgan va bugun hammaning e'tiboriga havola qilingan islohotlarni huquqiy ta'minlash, harakatlar strategiyasidan taraqqiyot strategiyasi sari to'plamida aks etgan. Batafsil ma'lumotlarni shu to'plamdan tanishib olishingiz imkoniyati mavjud. Bugungi asosiy e'tiborimizni yuqorida ham ta'kidlab o'tdim, 22-26-yillarga mo'ljallangan yangi O'zbekiston strategiyasi, taraqqiyot strategiyasi doirasida oldimizda turgan vazifa va chaqiriqlarga qaratmoqchimiz. Yangi taraqqiyot strategiyasi 7 ta ustuvor yo'nalishdan iborat bo'lib, ular jami 100 ta maqsadni o'ziga qamrab oladi. Inson qadrini ulug'lash va faol mahalla yilida amalga oshirishga qaratilgan davlat dasturi bu yilda 398 ta banddan iborat bo'lib, unda 300 ga yaqin normativ huquqiy hujjat loyihasini, xususan 40 ga yaqin qonun loyihalarini ishlab chiqish nazarda tutilgan. Demak, davlat dasturini amalga oshirishda birinchi ustuvor yo'nalish u yerdagi munosabatlarni huquqiy jihatdan tartibga solishga qaratilgan. Bu huquqshunoslardan bilim, professionallik, mas'uliyat talab etadi albatta. Oldimizda turgan eng asosiy chaqiriqlardan biri bu jadal rivojlanish davrida qonunchilik barqarorligini ta'minlash. Bugungi kunda butun dunyoda hammamizga ma'lum juda ham jadal munosabatlar o'zgaryapti, ularni tartibga solish bilan bog'liq munosabatlar esa aksariyat holatlarda ushbu munosabatlardan orqada qolmoqda. Munosabatlarni raqamli formatga o'tishi, nafaqat ularni o'z vaqtida sifatli tartibga solish, balki norma ijodkorligi jarayoniga nisbatan ham hozirgi amaliyotni tubdan o'zgartirish masalasini taqozo qiladi. Shu bois davlat dasturidagi biza oldimizda turgan ikkinchi chaqiriq bu norma ijodkorligiga raqamli yondashuv masalasi hisoblanadi. Yaqin istiqbolda qonunlar sun'iy intellekt yordamida ishlab chiqiladi va avtomatik ravishda ijroga qaratiladi. Bunga o'tish huquqshunoslar bu jarayonda huquqshunoslar sun'iy intellektni boshqaruvchisi sifatida o'z faoliyatini amalga oshirishga tayyor bo'lishlari lozim. Uchinchi chaqiriq sifatida norma ijodkorligidagi sifatli, operativ va oson aloqani yuzaga keltirish, yaratish. Yuzaga kelayotgan munosabatlarni tartibga solishda huquqshunoslarni bilimlarini oshirish, turli sohalardagi mutaxassislarning yordami kerak bo'ladi. Shuning uchun tartibga solish mexanizmlarini ishlab chiqishda davlat, biznes, ilm-fan va fuqarolik jamiyati bilan bamaslahat ish tutishimiz lozim bo'ladi. Chunki barcha munosabatlarda yuristlar to'laqonlik barcha soha bo'yicha yetarli bilimga ega emas hisoblanadi. Buning uchun jamoatchilik muhokamasi, tartibga solish ta'sirini baholash kabi qulay vositalar, ya'ni jahonda rivojlangan davlatlar tomonidan qo'llanilayotgan zamonaviy tartibga solish vositalaridan foydalanishimiz lozim. To'rtinchi chaqiriq bu huquqiy makonning globallashuvi. Zamonaviy sharoitlarda mana integratsiyalashuv jarayonlaridan, ularning yutuq muammolaridan hech qaysi mamlakat chetda qolayotgani yo'q. Buni mana pandemiya ham o'zi isbotlab berdi. Savdo-sotiq, iqtisodiy, madaniy aloqalar butun dunyo mamlakatlari bo'ylab bir-biriga o'zaro bog'liq va singib ketgan. Shu bois ushbu sohada tartibga solish mexanizmlari imkon qadar universal va barcha uchun tushunarli bo'lishi lozim. Ya'ni tartibga solish mexanizmlari deganda albatta biz huquqiy normativ huquqiy hujjatlarni, ya'ni qonunchilik hujjatlarini birinchi navbatda nazarda tutamiz. Endi yakunda butun dunyo huquqshunoslari o'zaro tajriba almashishi, mana bugunga o'xshagan tadbirlarni o'tkazishimiz, hamkorlikni yo'lga qo'yish orqali biz hozirgi yuzaga kelayotgan muammolarni birgalikda tartibga solish imkoniyatimiz yaratiladi. Bu esa albatta boshqa sohalarni ham rivojlanishga, zamonaviy va tushunarli, barcha hurmat qilib itoat etadigan huquqiy zamin yaratishga xizmat qiladi. O'ylaymanki, bugungi tadbir boshlanayotgan mutlaqo yangi darajadagi hamkorligimiz debochasi bo'ladi. E'tiboringlar uchun rahmat. Ruxsatinglar bilan so'z navbatini tadbirimizda Amerika Qo'shma Shtatlarining O'zbekistondagi elchisi janob Daniel Rozenblum tashrif buyurganlar. Ularga ishtiroklari uchun o'z minnatdorchiligimizni bildirgan holda navbatdagi so'zni bersak. Marhamat.
Assalomu alaykum. Thank you, Deputy Minister Karimov, Mr. Tulyakov, Ambassador Adrian, Ms. Domovsky, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Avvalambor, O'zbekiston hukumatini Yangi O'zbekistonning 2022-2026 yillarga mo'ljallangan taraqqiyot strategiyasini qabul qilingani bilan tabriklayman. It's my pleasure to join you here today at this international conference to review legal support for the implementation of the 2017 to 21 Uzbekistan Development Action Strategy. And also at today's conference to discuss new tasks and challenges facing the legal community in light of the new 2022 to 26 development strategy. The United States is proud to support Uzbekistan's development and sweeping legal, economic, social, and educational reforms aimed at ensuring the well-being of each and every citizen of this country. Today's conference is supported by the U.S. government through the USAID's Legal Reform Program and its major national partners, the Ministry of Justice, as well as other government of Uzbekistan agencies. We've been partnering with the Ministry of Justice and other national counterparts to implement this project for over 3 years now. And I'm pleased to note that our fruitful cooperation has contributed to the successful implementation of the 2017 to 21 development strategy by providing legislative support in line with the best international practices, by enhancing the capacity of legal professionals, and by empowering civil society to take a more active position in the lawmaking process. The new 2022 to 26 development strategy is an important follow-up to the 2017 to 21 strategy, and it sets a way forward for the government and other stakeholders in the implementation of Uzbekistan's ambitious reform agenda for the next 5 years. Konun ustvolegiga rioya kilish, va fukarolar hukuklarni himoya kilish, yangi tarakiyot strategiyasining ajralmaz kesimdir. Ushbu muhim hujjatga ushbu masalalarni kiritishda ishtirok etgan barchani olqishlayman. We can all agree that building and sustaining rule of law is extremely important. We all know that governments around the world need to have good and effective laws, citizen-oriented institutions, and processes in place to ensure accountability, sustainability, and access to justice for all. Legal and regulatory reform and related institutional change don't happen overnight. They take time, enormous effort, and political will at all levels of society. It's all the more gratifying, therefore, to see the results of these efforts which we've been witnessing during the past 5 years. Now in Uzbekistan, lawmaking activity is more transparent, with wider public discussions of draft regulations, digitalization of the process that makes public participation even easier, and participation of civil society in the process. Today's conference is a chance to summarize the results, assess the impact of the enormous legislative and regulatory work over the past period, and jointly look into future perspectives of our cooperation. While so much progress has been made, there is still more that needs to be done to fully realize the reforms and priorities laid out by the government in the new strategy. And top among those are legislation to facilitate full participation of NGOs in the country's development, respect for human rights, and continued fundamental reform of the judiciary. It's encouraging to see that the new strategy for 22 to 26 prioritizes respect for human honor and dignity, enforcement of citizens' legitimate interests and well-being in a free civil society, as well as strengthening justice and rule of law. And I'd like to stress that these priorities, this group of priorities, comes first on the list of 7 priorities in the new strategy. We believe this shows how important they are for the government and the people of Uzbekistan. The U.S. government, through its various agencies, including USAID, has made significant contribution to the implementation of the 2017 to 21 development strategy. And we consider this evidence that the government of Uzbekistan puts trust in our bilateral cooperation. And we value that trust very highly. Ҳуқуқий Uzbekistan hukumatini янги таrakiyot strategiyasini amalga oshirishda kolab kuvvatlashga tayyor. E'tiboringiz uchun rahmat.
Janob elchi, katta rahmat bugungi tadbirimizga tashrif buyurganingiz uchun va juda to'g'ri ta'kidladingiz. Biz ham albatta barcha islohotlarni avvalo huquqiy jihatdan uni tartibga solib, uni huquqiy doirada amalga oshirilishi bizani birinchi maqsadlarimizdan biri hisoblanadi va bundan keyin ham biz bu borada hamkorlik qilishga tayyormiz. Ruxsatinglar bilan tadbirimizni ochib berish uchun navbatdagi so'zni Mikayela Meredith xonimga beramiz. Shu o'rinda Adliya vazirligi va bugungi tadbirimiz konferensiya ishtirokchilari nomidan Amerika Qo'shma Shtatlari Xalqaro taraqqiyot agentligining O'zbekistondagi vakolatxonasiga katta minnatdorchilik bildiramiz. Bugungi tadbirni tashkil etishda yaqindan yordam berganligi uchun. Marhamat, Mikayela Meredith xonim.
Assalamu alaikum, Deputy Prime Minister Karimov, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's my pleasure to be with you here this morning. Today's event serves as a platform to find solutions to ensuring rule of law here in Uzbekistan. Adhering to the rule of law in any country is important because it's the foundation of justice, opportunity, and peace. Rule of law also underpins development, accountable government, and respect for fundamental rights. In a country that adheres to the rule of law, the law is known and accessible. The court system is independent and resolves disputes in an open and impartial manner. All persons have the right to a fair and prompt trial, and all members of society, government, civil society, private sector alike, are subject to and accountable to the law. The United States government, through the Agency for International Development, has supported the government of Uzbekistan to promote rule of law since 2014. We are proud to stand in partnership with Uzbekistan on this critical initiative, as well as to support the government's other ongoing sweeping legal, economic, and social and educational reforms. These reforms are aimed at ensuring the well-being of each and every citizen in this country and giving Uzbekistan a stronger voice and standing in the international arena. As the ambassador said, USAID has supported the previous development strategy for 2017 through 2021. And under that strategy, the government of Uzbekistan has improved a number of key systems to better serve citizens. This includes the establishment of the Institute of Appeals to Parliament and a higher quality lawmaking process. Another key development was stronger enforcement of the law on parliamentary oversight, which led to the Parliament sending more than 1,600 inquiries to state institutions, requiring them to respond to citizens' expressed concerns. USAID, through its legal reform program, supported Uzbekistan's development strategy for 2017 to 2021. And allow me to just take a moment to highlight some of the key achievements that our legal reform program in partnership with the government of Uzbekistan achieved. For one, we supported the development of the law and guarantees of equal rights and opportunities for women and men. And we've since then developed a practical handbook entitled Gender Equality from Idea to Law in Uzbek and Russian. And we also trained representatives of 10,000 mahalla across the country on gender legislation. We also supported the Ombudsman's Office to review the draft law on the ombudsperson and the development and legal examination of the draft entrepreneurship code. We also printed and donated over 2,000 copies of the collection of legal documents for the rights of people with visual impairments. And this was done in Braille and handed over to the Ministry of Justice and civil society organizations that work with people with disabilities. We also trained over 80 professionals, including the staff of the Intellectual Property Agency, advocates, judges, and others on the protection of intellectual property rights. And our program also supported the development of 36 legal courses, including legislative drafting, that are already incorporated into the curricula of leading legal educational institutions. At this point, I wanted to congratulate the government of Uzbekistan on adopting the development strategy, the new development strategy for new Uzbekistan for 2022-2026, assisting our partners in creating a better legal framework and supporting the implementation of this development strategy for the next 5 years are a priority for USAID. And as the ambassador said, while much progress has been made already, there's still much more that needs to be done, including ensuring the participation of NGOs, respect for human rights, and continuing to reform the judiciary to make sure it's transparent and independent. But AID stands committed to work with the government to advance these reforms. We'll continue to provide assistance in the areas of legislative improvement, development of the legal profession, and creation of an enabling environment for civil society and NGOs. And to achieve these goals, we'll continue to partner with the Ministry of Justice and other national counterparts to ensure the development of rule of law principles. Learning and employing the best practices is vital to the success of legal reform, and I'm pleased to announce that there are experts here, not only from the United States, but also from the United Kingdom and Croatia, who are ready to share their knowledge and rich experience today. At this time, in conclusion, I'd like to acknowledge the support received by USAID from the government, including, of course, the Minister of Justice, Davletov, as well as the genuine interest and motivation of the legal professionals, legislators, and citizens, all of whom have been absolutely indispensable in achieving meaningful legal reforms in Uzbekistan. I'd also like to thank USAID's Legal Reform Program Interim Chief of Party, Mrs. Nazarova, and her team for their excellent and hard work and commitment to provide maximum technical support to the government of Uzbekistan in implementing its reform agenda. Thank you. USAID stands ready to continue to support the ongoing legal reforms and developments in Uzbekistan. We are confident that with your continued engagement and contributions, we can achieve these shared goals. Thank you.
Meridit xonim, katta rahmat. Juda to'g'ri ta'kidladingiz, hali oldimizda qiladigan ishlar ko'p. Biz ushbu strategiyani amalga oshirish doirasida albatta xorijiy hamkorlarimiz bilan birgalikda, jumladan USAID va boshqa barcha xorijiy hamkorlarimiz bilan birgalikda ilg'or xorijiy tajribani o'rgangan holda birgalikda ishlashga tayyormiz. Katta rahmat. So'z navbatini Adliya vazirligining doimiy hamkorlari bo'lgan Yevropa Ittifoqining O'zbekistondagi delegatsiyasi hamda Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkiloti taraqqiyot dasturining O'zbekistondagi doimiy vakolatxonalari ishtirok etmoqdalar. Bugungi tadbirimizda navbatdagi so'zni Charlotte Adrian xonimga bersak. Marhamat.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Dear Deputy Minister Karimov, dear Mr. Tulyakov, dear Ambassador Rosenblum, dear Ms. Dimovska, and dear Meredith, and of course distinguished guests. It is an honor for me to take part of the opening of this very important conference. I would like to start by saying that I believe that this is a sad day for Ukraine. It's a sad day for Europe, and in fact, it's a sad day for the world. But it makes this conference even more important today than maybe a couple of days ago. We, the EU, support the reform process that has been underway in Uzbekistan since 2017. And in this broader agenda, judicial and governance reforms are key for the entire transformation process, for the reform agenda that President Mirziyoyev has given and repeated with a new development strategy this year. The EU's objective is to support Uzbekistan. It's to support Uzbekistan's transition to a pluralistic democratic system based on rule of law, respect for human rights, and a flourishing civil society and elimination of all forms of discrimination. And this is exactly what we also hear from President Mirziyoyev. And this is not just a Western idea. This is because it's the fundamentals that are, in fact, basic needs for a flourishing and a society which gives the opportunities for all and ensures sustainable development and ensures also that the sustainable development goals can be achieved and implemented. For the first time ever, the EU, one of our 3 priority sectors and areas for our assistance in our next program, and this has been just recently adopted, it will be effective governance. We used to concentrate on agriculture, but now we're going into another sector, thanks to, in fact, the request also from the Uzbek government, and we will be supporting democratic governance reforms, rule of law, human rights, and improved public services. The Ministry of Justice has been playing a significant role in ensuring the success of the reforms. And today, you have the opportunity to assess the important results that have been achieved during the last 5 years in implementing the 2017 and 21 strategy, and also set the targets for the next strategy. Now, we stand ready, the EU, to continue the collaboration and cooperation with the Ministry of Justice. And we have obviously also already achieved important results. Last year, Uzbekistan was granted the GSP Plus scheme. And this is not only about trade. This is also about implementing of 27 conventions that Uzbekistan has ratified and that Uzbekistan is implementing. And therefore, this is also a way, in fact, of acknowledging the important reforms that have been done, but also, as today, this scheme also looks at how, in fact, these reforms and how these conventions are being implemented, because it's important also in EU, also in the world, to see how things are progressing. And we will have a first monitoring missions, and I'm sure we will have the opportunity to meet again at the end of March, and this will be the opportunity again to go through the 27 conventions and see where we stand together. When I say together, it's because this is a scheme which is important for Uzbekistan because it's an incentive. But it's also an important scheme for the EU because it also gives us the opportunity, not only in the EU, but also with our different partners, to see where you need support and where we can provide you the capacities, the support that you would like to see. Let me just maybe also give you a little bit of a view on our ongoing activities as we have on public services, and of course working with our partners. We are looking at both the Ministry of Justice but also the Agency for Public Services and UNDP. We are looking at public service delivery in rural areas, and this is, again, this also depends on the good functioning of the legal framework, good functioning of rule of law, and implementation of the reforms. And we're happy to see that the digitalization, as was mentioned as one of the priorities in the reform process, is also very well led by the Public Services Agency under the Ministry of Justice. We are now also, we have been looking at supporting last year with what we call TAIEX, which is technical assistance, short-term technical assistance. We have been looking at providing knowledge on measures for the comprehensive systematization of national legislation. So obviously this is also important for making sure that rule of law is being implemented. And in the future, we will be looking at a twinning. And what we call a twinning is, in fact, cooperation between peers, cooperation between the Ministry of Justice and also with ministries of justice from Europe. I don't want to be too long, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'd like to maybe just make one point more. We're extremely positively impressed by the reforms over the last 5 years. We also believe that there is still lots of to be done. But we know that according to the World Bank, I still remember that they were saying reforms are made by people, and people also take time for changes in the mentality. So we know this takes time, but what is really important is to have all actors participating in the efforts that, again, President Mirziyoyev also wants to have for this country. And what we see is that on the civil society, this is also an important media, civil society. All actors can be important actors for making the reforms happening. So with this, I would like to wish you an important and a crucial event today, and wishing, of course, for Uzbekistan and the citizens of Uzbekistan good results also. And also just finishing by, of course, saying that EU, and I like to say that it's not only EU, but EU with our partners, being it the UN system, being it with the, of course, and thanking for the American Embassy and USAID for having invited us for this event. Being it together, we're here happy to support whenever there is a need. We're extremely happy to come in. So with this, I would like to wish you a very good conference. And then my last word is, of course, Katar Ahmad. Thank you.
Adrian xonim, katta rahmat. Ayniqsa qonun ustuvorligini ta'minlash, qonunchilik sohasidagi islohotlarni davom ettirishda yaqindan hamkorlik qilish bo'yicha taklifingizni qo'llab-quvvatlaymiz. Rahmat. Keyingi so'z navbati Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkiloti taraqqiyot dasturining O'zbekistondagi doimiy vakili Matilda Dimovskiy xonimga. Marhamat.
Rahmat. Hurmatli Janob Karimov, Meredith Xonim, Excellencies, hurmatli ishtirokchilar, Assalamu alaikum. I'm grateful that UNDP was given the floor to this conference. In fact, it's because what I think I will be sharing is the reflection of the experience of UNDP over the past 5 years in accompanying the massive legal framework reform that has been happening to implement the action strategy. It was that was the basis, the requirement for the strategy to become true. And over the past 5 years, we have been doing that with support and together with the colleagues from the European Union delegation, with USAID, and I believe that this will be kind of a summary of the experience that we have witnessed over the past year, but also forward-looking, I think, and that's the conference about the forward-looking experience. We did engage in a building of a effective legal framework with the understanding that a fair and functioning legal system in conformity with the international standards is the cornerstone of the development. And therefore the importance of taking it at the time when the country was having such a huge ambition. So what are the key points that come once in retrospective? First, that the legal basis was definitely substantively expanded. You know it much better, the number of laws which have been adopted, revisited, number of degrees, etc. But the point is that many of these legal documents became a turning point, and they laid the foundation of a systemic transformation of the country. Institutions, I give only few examples: legal documents on anti-corruption, on administrative procedures, on public oversight measures, etc. Those were important milestones. The second point is that the process became much more open and participatory than it was before. Number of tools, instruments have been introduced. I mentioned only the people's receptions as a new format between the government and the people, but also the concept of open data that ask for a mandatory disclosure of information by the certain government agencies. And that was important starting point. The third, and extremely important, was that the documents adopted over the past 5 years became much more than before aligned with the international human rights standards and human rights principles, and allowed, in fact, for those rights to be improved, such as the abolition of the legal documents on criminalization of forced labor, abolishment of exit visa, and so on. And of course, that was reflected into the international ratings, indexes that we all are well aware of. For example, the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, where Uzbekistan improved, particularly in 2021, the strongest improvement I think it showed. Now, I think all of this is important to have in mind for looking forward, because it sets the basis for the future. Day before yesterday, we spoke about the role of the human rights and democracy for sustainable, as critical components of sustainable development and lasting peace. And we spoke about the core elements of human rights and democracy being the equity and trust within the society. And we argued that any effort to advance democracy and human rights will have to go beyond mere legislation, but it will have to look for empowering of all segments of the society, being it a male or female, young or old, living in urban or rural Uzbekistan, and empowering them with the rights, choices, opportunities for the future, for living fulfilling lives and use of their full potential. And that's the only way to judge, to assess the success of the reforms. So I mentioned this because these are the expectations. There are big expectations, in fact, from the new development strategy of Uzbekistan. That is the big promise of the strategy, that consolidates the results of the previous period, but sets the ambitious targets. One of the key, or the first pillar priorities is building of a state that cares about the dignity, ensuring citizens' interests and well-being, but also about the second one goes about strengthening the justice and the rule of law. And these are very strong commitments for the year ahead, for which Uzbekistan shall be very much congratulated. Now, of course, to translate this into a reality will require additional effort and a much more legislative framework adjustment. And therefore, building on what we have seen in the past, we believe it is critical. A few things are very important. First, it is important to expand the openness, transparency, and participatory approach for a meaningful contribution of the people, because that's at the essence of the strategy, that it is centered around the people. And that could be done by enhancing, for example, the role of the local governments, of the parliament, of the local bodies, and of course the role of the civil society in the lawmaking, and the oversight in the implementation, which is extremely important. The second point is that it is going from action to development, which is the direction of the strategy, will require also a consistency, coherence between the policies and the legislation based on human rights standards and aligned with the international and evidence-based. So for that purpose, access to data, to analysis, comparative experiences, global trends, and good practices of other countries will be extremely important. And I will finish that with the key point that I made. In fact, it's important to go beyond the mere legislation, but making sure that the institutions embrace the legislation, there is a legal awareness, civil society advocating for for the legislation, and so on. So these are all areas in which UNDP will be ready to continue working with our partners. And yet another time, I congratulate for the adoption of the strategy, for having this conference at such a right time, and I wish good proceedings out of it. Etimboringi suchun kata rahmat.
Imoska xonim, katta rahmat. Albatta biz Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotini taraqqiyot dasturi bilan hamkorligimizni juda yuqori baholaymiz. O'ylaymizki, kelgusi 5 yillikda ham qonun ustuvorligini ta'minlash, inson huquqlarini kafolatlash va strategiyada belgilangan boshqa vazifalarni amalga oshirishda yaqindan hamkorlik qilishga umid qilib qolamiz. Endi ruxsatinglar bilan so'z navbatini Taraqqiyot strategiyasi markazining ijrochi direktori janob Eldor Tulyakovga bersak. Marhamat.
Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli xonimlar va janoblar, hurmatli vazir o'rinbosari Karimov, hurmatli elchi janoblari Rosenblum, elchi xonim Adrian, Dimovska xonim, hurmatli Meredith xonim, barchangizni ushbu tadbirda ko'rib turganimizdan xursandmiz va alohida aytib o'tmoqchimanki, aynan mazkur hozir mana yuqorida O'zbekistonning yaqin hamkorlari aytib o'tgandek, minnatdorchilik bildirmoqchiman mana shu hamkorlarimizga, ham davlat organlariga, ham fuqarolik jamiyati institutlariga, aynan ular tomonidan doimiy ravishda mana shu islohotlarni amalga oshirishda hamkorlikka shay ekanliklari, doim mana ham davlat bilan ham fuqarolik jamiyati bilan birgalikda tengma-teng hamkorlikni yo'lga qo'yib kelganliklari uchun alohida minnatdorchilik bildirmoqchiman va umid qilamizki, bundan keyin ham mana hozir so'zlardan ko'rib turibmiz, ham davlat organlari bilan ham fuqarolik jamiyati institutlari bilan bundan keyin ham faol hamkorlik bo'ladi va biz buni albatta eshitganimizdan xursandmiz, chunki harakatlar strategiyasi doirasida biz ko'rdikki, aynan o'sha ochiq xalq bilan muloqot yo'lga qo'yildi. Bu degani o'sha xalq nazorati islohotlarni amalga oshirishda har bir bosqichda ta'minlanganligini biz bevosita guvohi bo'ldik harakatlar strategiyasi doirasida. Undan tashqari harakatlar strategiyasi doirasida mana shu xalq bilan muloqot natijasi o'laroq biz ko'rdikki, davlat rahbaridan tortib eng quyi bo'g'ingacha rahbarlar xalq bilan doimiy ravishda muloqotni yo'lga qo'yishdi va eng bir e'tibor qaratadigan jihatimiz mana shu muloqotlar doimiy ravishda tashkil qilindi. Ya'ni bir joyga borgandan keyin xalqqa dardi, xalqqa tashvishi, xalqqa masalasini eshitilgandan keyin u yerga yana bir ma'lum muddat o'tgandan keyin qaytib borilib, haqiqatda mana shu ko'tarilgan masala, muammolar o'z ijobiy yechimini topdimi, yo'qmi deb davlat rahbaridan tortib boshqalar ham aynan mana shunga alohida e'tibor berganliklari, ya'ni aytilgan gap shu qog'ozda qolib ketmasdan amalda ta'minlanishiga alohida e'tibor berilganligini mana shu masalalar harakatlar strategiyasida jadal tus olganligini ko'rishimiz mumkin. Undan tashqari xalq bilan maslahatlashuv instituti ham keyingi mana shu olib borildi strategiya doirasida. Bunda ham xalqimiz juda faol qatnashdi. Bu o'sha harakatlar strategiyasining loyihasini muhokamasida, undan keyin o'sha davlat dasturlarini muhokamasida, qonun hujjatlari, prezident hujjatlarini mana qabul qilishdan oldin xalq bilan bevosita o'sha maslahatlashib, undan keyin mana shu fikrlarni inobatga olgan holdan keyin mana shu masalalar qabul qilinganda biz aynan xalqqa mana shu islohotlarda faol ishtirok etayotganligini guvohi bo'ldik va bunda ham bizning mana shu hamkorlarimiz, xalqaro hamkorlarimiz, mana USAID, bu yerda mana Birlashgan Millatlar Tashkilotining taraqqiyot dasturi, Yevropa delegatsiyasi doimiy ravishda fuqarolar bilan uchrashuvlar o'tkazib, ularni mana shu jarayonda faolligini oshirishga qaratilgan, biz capacity building deymiz, ya'ni o'sha salohiyatini oshirishga qaratilgan treninglar bo'ladimi, ularni metodik jihatdan qo'llab-quvvatlash bo'ladimi, mana shularni doimiy ravishda hamkorlikda olib borishdi. Endi albatta mana shu islohotlarning uzviy davomi sifatida taraqqiyot strategiyasi qabul qilindi. Biz mana juda ham mamnunmiz. Mana elchi janoblari Dimoska xonim ham, Adrian xonim ham mana aytib o'tishdi, USAID vakillari bundan keyin ham mana ular shu strategiyani olqishlab, bundan keyin ham mana shu strategiya doirasida hamkorlikka tayyor ekanliklarini aytib o'tishdi. Biz bundan ham juda ham xursandmiz, chunki ta'kidlash lozimki, bu taraqqiyot strategiyasida bosh tamoyil inson qadri. Inson qadri deganimizda albatta bu o'sha inson huquqlarini ta'minlash, demokratiyani yanada o'sha ta'minlash, undan tashqari o'sha islohotlarni davom ettirish degani. Shu nuqtai nazardan biz mana shu inson huquqlari va demokratiyani ta'minlash deganda nafaqat biz ikkinchi yo'nalishda, balki o'sha barcha 7 ta yo'nalishga alohida e'tibor qaratishimiz kerak, chunki inson huquqlari mazkur hujjatda har bir yo'nalishda ta'minlanayotganligidan dalolat beradi. Birinchi masalan yo'nalishda bu yerda fuqarolik jamiyati ishtirokini davlat boshqaruvida yanada kengaytirish, bu bitta misol bo'ladigan bo'lsa, ikkinchidan fuqarolik jamiyati instituti davlat tashkilotlarining turli darajadagi shu turli darajasini bundan keyin yanada ko'proq nazorat qilish imkoniyati, ularni faoliyatini baholash imkoniyati yaratilishi rejalashtirilganligi, bu o'sha huquqiy demokratik davlat mana shu yo'nalishda qurilishiga ham rejalashtirilayotganligini ko'rishimiz mumkin. Yoki bo'lmasam o'sha aholimizga qulaylik yaratish nuqtai nazaridan mana o'sha davlat xizmatlarini 100% ga olib chiqish, elektron davlat xizmatlarini, bu ham aholimizga qulaylik yaratish. Ijtimoiy sohani qaraydigan bo'lsak, bu yerda ham inson huquqlari ta'minlanayotganligidan dalolat beradi. Chunki agar inson och bo'lsa yoki sog'lig'ida bir sog'lig'i yaxshi bo'lmasa, imkoniyatlardan yaratilgan o'sha huquqlardan to'liq foydalana olmaydi. Shuning uchun ham davlat mana shunday imkoniyat yaratyaptiki, o'sha ijtimoiy himoyani yangi bosqichga olib chiqish. Bu o'sha hattoki zaif qatlam, ya'ni og'ir ahvolga tushib qolgan aholini alohida qo'llab-quvvatlashgacha doir mana islohotlar rejalashtirilganligini yoki ta'lim huquqini ta'minlash nuqtai nazaridan o'sha eng quyi bo'g'in bog'chalarning soni, maktablarning soni, oliy ta'lim muassasalarining soni keskin ko'tarilishi, sifatini oshirishga qaratilayotgan e'tibor bu o'sha ta'lim huquqini ta'minlashga qaratilayotganligi yoki bo'lmasa sog'liqni saqlash masalalariga mana bu yerda alohida urg'u berilgani aytib o'tmoqchi bo'lganim, inson huquqlari aynan strategiyaning har bir yo'nalishida ta'minlanishi maqsad qilinganligini alohida ta'kidlashimiz lozim. Yoki bo'lmasam albatta hozir o'sha harakatlar strategiyasida gender tenglik masalalariga alohida e'tibor berish boshlanganligini, gender tenglik natijasida hozir ayollarimizni faolligi ham jamiyatda ham siyosatda oshganligini ko'rishimiz mumkin. Shu masala yanada davom ettirilishi rejalashtirilganligini alohida ta'kidlashimiz lozim. Hattoki mana migrantlarimizga ham ularni haq huquqlarini, ijtimoiy himoyasini ta'minlashga taraqqiyot strategiyasida katta e'tibor. Bu yerda barcha aholi qatlami qamrab olinib, ularning haq huquqlari doimiy ravishda har bir qatlamda ta'minlanishi rejalashtirilgan va o'sha mana shu hozirgi dolzarb vazifamiz albatta mana shu islohotlarni ro'yobga chiqarish birinchidan, ikkinchidan shu islohotlarni har biri, ya'ni qanday imkoniyat berilayotganligini xalqimizga ochiq oydin aytib berish. Chunki mana biz taraqqiyot strategiyasi markazi tomonidan mana shunaqangi kitob nashr qildik va bunaqangi nashrlarimiz ko'p bo'ladi. Ya'ni aholimizni huquqiy ongini oshirish bizning maqsadimiz. Ular o'zini huquqini bilgandan keyin tegishli davlat organlaridan mana shu bajarilyaptimi, yo'qmi bir so'rash imkoniyati oshadi. Shuning uchun ham biz maqsad qilganimiz taraqqiyot strategiyasi markazi avvalo xalqimizga yetkazish mana shu islohotlarni. Undan keyin albatta mana shu islohotlar qay darajada bajarilayotganligini nazorat qilish uchun biz yaqinda katta bir platforma, elektron platforma joriy qilamiz. Bu platformada taraqqiyot strategiyasi hamda uni amalga oshirishga qaratilgan davlat dasturi qay darajada bajarilib borayotganligini bevosita xalqimiz ochiq ma'lumotlar asosida ko'rib borish imkoniyati yaratiladi. Bu ham o'sha fuqarolik jamiyati institutiga berilayotgan mana shu imkoniyatlar va bu imkoniyatlardan biz hammamiz faol foydalanishimiz kerak. E'tiboringiz uchun rahmat.
Katta rahmat. Taraqqiyot strategiyasi markaziga bugungi tadbirimizni tashkil etishda yaqindan ko'mak ko'rsatgani uchun alohida minnatdorchilik bildirmoqchi edik. Endi ruxsatinglar bilan video film namoyishi ko'rsatmoqchi edik. Bu so'nggi 5 yilda norm ijodkorligidagi miqdor va sifat o'zgarishlariga bag'ishlangan taqdimot. Marhamat, ekranga qarashinglarni so'raymiz.
Joriy yildan mamlakatimizda Prezident farmoni bilan tasdiqlangan 2017-2021 yillarda O'zbekiston Respublikasini rivojlantirishning 5 ta ustuvor yo'nalishi bo'yicha harakatlar strategiyasining amaldagi ijrosi nihoyalandi. Mazkur strategiya 5 ta ustuvor yo'nalishdan iborat edi. Uning doirasida har bir yilga yangi va o'ziga xos nom berilib, bu bo'yicha davlat dasturlari qabul qilindi. Xususan, 2017-yil xalq bilan muloqot va inson manfaatlari yili deb e'lon qilindi. O'sha yili 162 ta normativ huquqiy hujjat, jumladan 56 ta qonun loyihasini ishlab chiqish hamda dasturni amalga tatbiq etish uchun 37 trillion 687.8 milliard so'm va 8 milliard 349.3 million AQSh dollari ajratish belgilandi. 2018-yil faol tadbirkorlik, innovatsion g'oyalar va texnologiyalarni qo'llab-quvvatlash yili deya nomlanib, bu bo'yicha qabul qilingan davlat dasturida 166 ta normativ huquqiy hujjat loyihasi, shundan 37 ta qonun ishlab chiqish ko'zda tutilgan. Dastur ijrosi uchun 11 milliard 239.2 milliard so'm va 1 milliard 284.9 million AQSh dollari ajratilgan. 2019-yil faol investitsiyalar va ijtimoiy rivojlanish yili bo'ldi. Bu yilda 167 ta normativ huquqiy hujjat, jumladan 20 ta qonun loyihasini ishlab chiqish belgilandi. Davlat dasturi ijrosiga 16 trillion 998.6 milliard so'm va 8 milliard 106.5 million AQSh dollari sarflash maqsad qilindi. 2020-yil ilm, ma'rifat va raqamli iqtisodiyotni rivojlantirish yili deb nomlandi. Shu yili 150 ta normativ huquqiy hujjat loyihasi, shu qatori 35 ta qonun ishlab chiqish mo'ljali olindi. Dastur ijrosi bois 16 trillion 998.6 milliard so'm va 10 milliard 301.5 million AQSh dollari ajratilgan. Va nihoyat 2021-yil yoshlarni qo'llab-quvvatlash va aholi salomatligini mustahkamlash yili deya atalib, 116 ta normativ huquqiy hujjat, jumladan 14 ta qonun loyihasini ishlab chiqish hamda tabiiyki dastur ijrosini ta'minlash uchun 29 trillion 492.7 milliard so'm, 2 milliard 610.4 million AQSh dollari va 57.5 million yevro ajratish nazarda tutildi. Umuman olganda 2017-2021 yillarda mamlakatni rivojlantirishning 5 ta ustuvor yo'nalishi bo'yicha harakatlar strategiyasi doirasida o'tgan davr mobaynida davlat va jamiyat hayotining barcha sohalarini tubdan isloh etishni qamrab olgan 300 taga yaqin qonun, 4000 dan ziyod prezident hujjatlari qabul qilindi. Joriy yildan boshlab esa mamlakatdagi islohotlarning keyingi davri boshlandi. Aniqrog'i, O'zbekiston Respublikasi prezidentining joriy yil 28 fevraldagi farmoni qabul qilinib, u bilan 2022-2026 yillarga mo'ljallangan yangi O'zbekistonning taraqqiyot strategiyasi, shu bilan birga inson qadrini ulug'lash va faol mahalla yilida amalga oshirish tadbirlariga oid davlat dasturi tasdiqlandi. O'z navbatida, harakatlar strategiyasidan taraqqiyot strategiyasiga o'tishda jahon miqyosidagi murakkab jarayonlarni va tabiiyki mamlakatimiz bosib o'tgan taraqqiyot natijalarini chuqur tahlil qilib, keyingi yillarda inson qadri uchun tamoyili asosida xalqimiz farovonligini yanada oshirish, iqtisodiy tarmoqlarni transformatsiya qilish va tadbirkorlikni jadal rivojlantirish, inson huquqlari va manfaatlarini so'zsiz ta'minlash hamda faol fuqarolik jamiyatini shakllantirish maqsad qilingan. Yangi O'zbekistonning taraqqiyot strategiyasi 100 ta maqsaddan iborat quyidagi 7 ta ustuvor yo'nalishni o'z ichiga oladi. Inson qadrini yuksaltirish va erkin fuqarolik jamiyatini yanada rivojlantirish orqali xalqparvar davlat barpo etish. Mamlakatimizda adolat va qonun ustuvorligi tamoyillarini taraqqiyotning eng asosiy va zarur shartiga aylantirish, milliy iqtisodiyotni jadal rivojlantirish va yuqori o'sish sur'atlarini ta'minlash. adolatli ijtimoiy siyosat yuritish, inson kapitalini rivojlantirish, ma'naviy taraqqiyotni ta'minlash va sohani yangi bosqichga olib chiqish, umumbashariy muammolarga milliy manfaatlardan kelib chiqqan holda yondashish, mamlakatimiz xavfsizligi va mudofaa salohiyatini kuchaytirish, ochiq, pragmatik va faol tashqi siyosat olib borish. Darvoqe, yangi strategiyani boshlab bergan dastlabki 2022-yil inson qadrini ulug'lash va faol mahalla yili deb nomlanib, yil dasturida 249 ta normativ-huquqiy hujjat, jumladan 26 ta qonun loyihasi ishlab chiqish belgilangan. Dasturni amalga oshirish uchun esa 55 trillion so'm va 11,7 milliard AQSh dollari ajratish ko'zda tutilgan.
Hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari, ruxsatinglar bilan konferensiyamizni asosiy qismiga o'tishdan oldin bugungi tadbirimizni ochib berishda ishtirok etgan mehmonlarimizga Adliya vazirligi va konferensiya ishtirokchilari nomidan alohida minnatdorchilik bildiramiz. Rahmat ishtirokchilar uchun. Va ma'ruzaga chiqadiganlar minbarga taklif qilamiz. Hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari, hammadan iltimos qilamiz, o'z joylaringizni egallab olsanglar. Tadbirimizning asosiy qismiga o'tmoqchimiz. Spikerlarimizni minbarga taklif qilamiz. Marhamat. Iltimos joylarga egallab olinglar. Hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari, endi tadbirimizning asosiy qismiga o'tsak. Ruxsatinglar bilan norma ijodkorligi faoliyati, erishilgan natijalar va yangi chaqiriqlar mavzusi bo'yicha alohida ayrim fikr mulohazalarni e'tiboringizga havola qilsam. Ma'ruza davomida norma ijodkorligi faoliyati davomida erishilgan natijalar, oldimizda turgan yangi vazifalarga oid ma'lumotlarni e'tiboringizga bir qisqacha yetkazishga harakat qilaman. Endi mana harakatlar strategiyasida belgilangan maqsadlarni amalga oshirish uchun shu oxirgi 5 yil davomida 5 ta davlat dasturi qabul qilindi. Endi hammamizga ma'lum, ularda 1382 ta banddan iborat topshiriqlar belgilangan bo'lib, ularning ijrosi ta'minlandi. Asosiy dasturda belgilangan tadbirlarni, vazifalarni amalga oshirish hammamizga ma'lum, aksariyati bu qonunchilik hujjatlarini ishlab chiqish, ularni huquqiy jihatdan tartibga solishni bevosita taqozo etadi, ya'ni norma ijodkorligi bilan bevosita bog'liq hisoblanadi. Mamlakatimiz mana mustaqilligidan boshlab turib, mana o'tgan qariyb 30 yil davrni inobatga oladigan bo'lsak, 30 mingdan ortiq normativ huquqiy hujjatlar davlat hisobiga olingan. Shundan 8 mingga yaqini, ya'ni deyarli 30% bu oxirgi 5 yil davomida qabul qilindi. Endi norma ijodkorligi faoliyat jarayonini bu keskinlashuvi biz huquqshunoslardan mutlaqo yangi ish usulini talab etadi. Endi hammamizga ma'lum, qaysidir tomondan ushbu yangi davrdagi munosabatlarni tartibga solish albatta huquqiy jihatdan tartibga solishni taqozo etadi. Bu o'z navbatida islohotlarni amalga oshirish, normativ huquq hujjatlar sonini ortishiga olib keladi, lekin amaliyotda qonun hujjatlarining ko'pligi amaliyotda huquqni qo'llashda ham ayrim muammolarni keltirib chiqaradi. Shu bois birinchi asosiy qilingan ishlardan biri bu norma ijodkorligi faoliyatini takomillashtirish konsepsiyasi tasdiqlandi. Ya'ni biza shu norma ijodkorligi jarayonida davlat organlari, davlat hukumat tomonidan qaysi yo'nalishlarda ish olib borish. Uni doirasida biz o'zimizga maqsad va vazifalarni belgilab oldik. Birinchisi bu qonunchilik bazasini tizimliligini ta'minlash. Bu vazifani amalga oshirish borasida Adliya vazirligi tomonidan barcha sohalarda qabul qilingan qonun hujjatlari tizimlashtirish orqali qonunchilik bazasini qisqartirish yoki boshqacha bir so'z bilan aytganda kesib tashlash, ya'ni tartibga solish, gilyotina usulini qo'llash ishlarini bir samarali yo'lga qo'yish vazifasi belgilab olindi va bu borada qaysidir ma'noda bir yutuqlarga ham erishildi. Buni aytmoqchi bo'lganimiz, birinchi o'tgan davr mobaynida mustaqillikdan boshlab qabul qilingan va hozirgi kunga qadar amalda bo'lib turgan, lekin o'z ahamiyatini yo'qotgan, eskirgan, boshqa bir amaldagi normativ huquq hujjatlarga ziddiyatni keltirib chiqaradigan hujjatlarni aniqlagan holda ularni bekor qilish masalalari ishlab chiqildi. Mana bugungi kunda 3 mingdan ortiq prezident va hukumat hujjatlari loyihalari bekor qilindi. Bu qonunchilik bazamizni 10% ga qisqartirishga erishildi. Tartibga solish gilyotina usuli bu nafaqat yuqori turuvchi normativ huquq hujjatlar, balkim idoraviy normativ huquq hujjatlar va mahalliy davlat hokimiyati organlari tomonidan qabul qilingan hujjatlarga nisbatan ham tatbiq etilmoqda va keng ko'lamli ishlar amalga oshirilmoqda. Shu bilan birga bu kodifikatsiyalash masalasi, bu tizimlashtirishning asosiy turlaridan biri hisoblanib, Adliya vazirligi tomonidan bu sohada ham bir nechta loyihalar ustida ishlanmoqda. Xabaringlar bor, mana fuqarolik kodeksining yangi tahriri ishlab chiqilyapti. Tadbirkorlik kodeksi loyihasi mana ishlab chiqib hozir hukumatga kiritilgan. Bundan tashqari nodavlat notijorat tashkilotlar to'g'risidagi qonun kodeks loyihasi ham ishlab chiqilmoqda. Ikkinchi yo'nalish sifatida bu normativ huquq hujjatlarini ishlab chiqish va qabul qilish jarayonlari raqamlashtirildi, shuningdek ularning ijrosi monitoringi takomillashtirildi. Jumladan mana bu yerda o'tirgan hammamizga ma'lum, normativ huquq hujjatlar loyihasini ishlab chiqish va kelishishni yagona elektron tizimi, ya'ni project.go.uz platformasi yaratildi va bu juda ham samarali mana davlat organlari o'rtasida ishlab qo'llanib kelinmoqda. Mahalliy ijro etuvchi hokimiyat organlarining qarorlarini ishlab chiqish, ularni kelishish jarayoni va ularni kelgusida ro'yxatdan o'tkazilishi bo'yicha yagona elektron tizim, e-qaror tizimi ishga tushirildi. Eng asosiylardan biri bu norma ijodkorligi faoliyatiga jamoatchilik ishtirokini keng ta'minlash masalasi. Bu borada hammamizga ma'lum regulation platformasi yaratildi va barcha davlat organlari tomonidan ishlab chiqilayotgan hujjatlar loyihalari ushbu tizim orqali jamoatchilik muhokamasiga qo'yilmoqda va ularning takliflarini ushbu tizimga solish ta'sirini baholashdan o'tkazish jarayonlarini soddalashtirib